Greetings and salutations. Welcome to this episode of Playwright Spotlight. Before we begin, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment down below, and share this show with a friend. If you're listening to us on your favorite podcast platform, be sure to leave a 5-star review and subscribe to the channel. My guest today is a playwright, performer, and director. She's written over 80 plays from full-length to one-act musicals, adaptations, and one-woman shows, while specialing in non-traditional roles for women. In 2022, her play In McClintock's Corn was national runner-up for the Jane Chambers Award for Excellence in Feminist Playwriting, sponsored by the Women and Theater Program of the Association for Theater and Higher Education. Her latest play, Georgia and the Butch, is a documentary play featuring the letters of the 9-year intimate relationship between Georgia O'Keeffe and Maria Chabot. It opens February 25th and runs through March 12th at the Tank in New York City. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Carolyn Gage.
I love it. I love it. That's wonderful.
So this is again, it always seems like there's one episode that happens, or every episode that happens, that there's a feature of playwriting that we haven't covered. And that, in this regard, while there's biopics or things like that, but a documentary play.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this first. Because it features letters of the 9-year relationship. Yeah. So are you taking an A.R. Gurney approach that he did with love letters, where it's a correspondence? Yeah. Or are you, okay, great, awesome.
We're doing a little bit of that. And actually, 1 second, I'm going to get you the book and show you.
Okay.
Where is it? I had it yesterday. I'm not finding it now, but here it is. This is the volume. And,
oh my gosh.
It's a 10-year correspondence almost. It's 9 years. And
are those the actual letters?
Yeah, and it's 500 pages. These are my notes when I wrote it. And then Rhea, who produced it, was very generous. She said, I'll take a look. That's her notes. And so she selected letters, I selected letters, and then I took her suggestions. And so this is, it was a huge project. It's a lot of letters. And also it's back in the day where if I wrote a letter, maybe I mailed it next week and you got it 2 weeks from now. And then by the time you've answered it, I've moved on. So it was very challenging to try and get a coherent narrative from it. So we have the two women reading their letters in a form of dialogue, like love letters. But then there's a third character that started out as a narrator, but there's a historical figure who was kind of in a triangle with them. And I used her as a narrator, and I wrote her dialogue. So At first I thought, that's not going to work. I remember one of my mentors said, you can have a real tree and a real bird in a real tree for a painting, or a fake bird and a fake tree. But don't try to have a real tree and a fake bird. It's not going to work. So I have two women reading actual correspondence with all the problems that come with that, because it's not real dialogue. And then I have a third character that I wrote dialogue for. And at first I thought, real bird, fake tree. But it worked. It worked really beautifully. So
is there correspondence between? No. Or when I say correspondence, so the third person, the narrator, does not correspond with any of the other characters. It's just kind of.
No, she has no letters. But she fills in the blank, and part of it is because Maria Chabot and Georgia O'Keeffe were together for the summers, because Georgia would leave Manhattan and go out to her ranch, Ghost Ranch in New Mexico, and the two women lived together and were very close. And we don't have the documentation of how those summers went. We have this enormous correspondence for the winters when Georgia went back and lived with her husband, who had another mistress by then. And the women would write back and forth. So again, that was another challenge in terms of playwriting, because, if you're living with somebody and she and Georgia would sleep on the roof of the Ghost Ranch together, you don't write letters to each other.
Right.
You write letters when there's a geographical distance. So there were all kinds of challenges in terms of playwriting, to try and make this hang together. But the correspondence was so important and so fascinating. We just kept going. And I feel like we came up with something that holds dramaturgical interest.
Right.
that tells the story, and it also honors the writing. So,
well, I imagine that you have to. I mean, when you go through and you've read everything, you've got to frame it within a certain perspective of that story. What story do you want to tell? Because I'm sure that there's so many different topics and subjects that are covered in each one of those letters, and you got to trim it down.
Well, I'm so glad you asked, because it's also a story. I am a lesbian, and I've written lesbian themed work for over 40 years, and it's been a struggle because of censorship is massive. And what that means is that we're not represented on stage, and the few times we're tokenized. We're the sister of the guy who has AIDS. That was big in the 80s. We were peripheral to gay men who were the center of the story. Even in Fun Home, I felt there was a certain amount of that dynamic. But, it's rare to see really, by, for, about, and serving the interests of lesbians. And what happens is that it's a whole different archetype that's missing, just completely missing. And older lesbians have a whole different storyline than older straight women, and so on. And our relationships aren't just like, oh, it's a question of genitals, and other than that, it looks just like a man and a woman, or who's the man and who's the woman. No, it's a whole different paradigm and a whole different archetype. And Maria Chabot was, she was a female who really defied labels. At the age of 13, she decided that she wanted to be a boy. I mean, this is middle school. Got a man's haircut. It's middle school in the 1920s in Texas. She just starts wearing ties, neckties, boys' clothes, boys' haircut. And she did that for 3 years, and then she decided, so you're thinking, oh, well, it's a trans man. But by 16, she's like, I want to be a writer, and I really want to experience the world as a female. So she undid all of that. And then when she was 18 or 19, she got in a 7-year relationship with an older woman that was deeply lesbian. And then she got out of that, and she dated some men, and she had 2 long-term intimate relationships with women and short ones with men. Is that truly bisexual, or is that a form of lesbianism? Was that a function of the time? So I guess today you could say she's queer, gender non-conforming, or in my generation, butch. But is that really a label, or does that have to do with how restrictive the roles for women were?
Well, I want to get into the censorship aspect. I'd like to think that in the last, I think we can say 40 years at this point, once you have Tony coming out with Angels in America, I'd like to think that theater is the one place where censorship doesn't really fall into place. So do you find that that censorship is located on the stage, or do you find that censorship might be in publication, into where there's
I find it on
publishers
the stage.
that won't touch stuff like that now? But I mean, you could kind of get away with it. I think you can almost get away with anything right now, as far as
no. I mean, the thing is, people say, and they started saying this. I mean, it was Collegiate, I believe, was late 80s, early 90s. There's never been a lesbian-themed, lesbian-centric, huge blockbuster, musical on Broadway. Sure. And that was, we're talking like 40, 50 years ago. But we still haven't made it. And then there's like Fun Home, but half the audience will tell you that's a gay male story of a closeted father. It's a whole other thing when you have a really lesbian-centric story.
Sure.
And,
Is that censorship, or is it just somebody not wanting to take the chance to produce it?
I think it's both. I think there's a sense of, let's take Cajo Fall, which is really, it was such a blockbuster, and it was so early on. But the roles were relatively recognizable. In fact, it was part of what they were sending up. They were going to pretend to be a married couple, and they were running into right-wing Christians or something. But, it was like you could sort of say, well, that one's the man, and that's the husband, there's the wife. Only the wife is, in drag, that kind of thing. I feel like that because of patriarchy, when you have same-sex women, in relationships, it's a really completely different model. You don't have that kind of, I felt like straight couples were relatively comfortable with the relationship in Cajo Fall because they could identify the feminine partner and the masculine partner. They knew who the mommy and who the daddy were for, they raised this kid together. It's just really different. And I feel like, I struggle with it because I've just really questioned why. I have a musical about Babe Diedrichson, who was a very, very masculine athlete. And there was lots of questionings, this is back in the 20s and 30s and then 40s, about her chromosomally, or is she really a man? Lots of very snide things in the press because she was so superior to most women athletes. They didn't want to compete with her. And so I spent 10 years working on a musical about her with just big blockbuster Olympic athlete numbers. The chorus for that show looks like the Smith rugby team. It doesn't look like the Rockettes. And I had, a major theater critic say, you have a subject matter here that's entirely unsuitable for musical theater.
Well,
nobody's in stilettos. Nobody's showing cleavage.
How does that? Well, that's a critic, and and we can say that maybe the critics are the ones who failed, if you will, in whatever aspect they were going for, as whether that's a director, writer, producer, or actor. That's where they feel that they have a place to say what can and cannot be put on stage.
But what was important to me was he could not access it. He couldn't access it because he was looking at an ugly woman. He was looking at a woman who was mistaken for a man all the time, who, could outperform most male athletes. And it was just kind of like a non-starter for him. It's like, nobody wants to see that. Again, it's different standards. He probably loved Cajo Fall. I'm sure he loved Torch Song Trilogy. I mean, especially because these shows love to kind of take on, both of those shows trashed mother figures, which is a comfortable trope in patriarchy. Again, I just feel like here's the problem. You don't know what you're missing because you're missing it. If you've never seen a lesbian-centered play, you really can't speak to, I don't think that's really a problem. It's like, well, why is it that, my butch athlete is not suitable subject for musical theater? I feel like there's just a really deep embedded prejudice. And we see this play out in the life of Maria Chabot because she was really intimate with Georgia O'Keeffe for 9 years. She spent her summers and springs with her at Ghost Ranch, doing everything for her. She mostly was not paid. It was labor of love. She ended up building this very famous house in Abiquiu for her, designed it, did all the research to figure out how to construct it, did a lot of the contracting and a lot of the manual labor herself. And she's been written out of history. She's sort of mentioned as an assistant or maybe a friend or a companion because it was a lesbian type of intimacy that people were really uncomfortable with. We don't know if they were lovers or not. And so right there, and then there was an age difference.
So with all of those letters, there's still nothing that points to whether or not there was a relationship.
I think just my take is that Maria was very much infatuated with Georgia, and Georgia was older. She was 25 years, something like that, older than her. But there's reference to that they spent the night, they'd sleep on the roof together, and maybe that's like slumber party stuff. But the first one up in the morning goes down and gets tea and brings it up for both of them. And in lots of ways, it was a domestic partnership type of relationship. And then one of the odder things that kind of jumped out was that there was a type of exercise that was very kind of trendy at that time. And you would put full-length mirrors in a room and then do the exercises in front of a mirror, and you did them with no clothes on. And Georgia would have Maria come and do these with her. And I'm thinking, well, if you have a younger woman who's completely infatuated with you, I would not ask them to do that. That's,
Sure.
that seems almost like a form of cruelty or something. I don't know.
So
it just wasn't, it's a relationship that defies all the categories.
Sure. How much creative license did you take? Did you take any creative license? Did you kind of put things in that you or it's all factual based on everything that's in those letters?
And like you said,
even with the narrator?
The narrator, I did because she's editorializing. There's a lot of gaps. Like I say, she'll like Alfred, the husband. No, it's like the husband has taken a lover who's even younger than Georgia, and then there's jealousy. Georgia is bringing some people out, and Maria's resenting it, and so I have her kind of be snidely talking about that, so that we can know who these people are that they're referring to.
So, in a, and I'm just kind of fascinated in this regard because, is there a traditional antagonist protagonist in this story?
I struggled with it, and I've been a lesbian a long time, but like I say, it wasn't quite lesbian because it's not like they were Maria was totally infatuated, it seemed like, but Georgia, it was harder to figure out what she was doing. She really exploited this young woman. She got an enormous amount of free labor and a house out of it. And she kept saying, "Oh, I'm going to leave it to you in my will." Yeah.
Did that happen?
No. In fact, but O'Keeffe kind of had a pattern of this because she, moved through 9 years with Maria, and then she had a secretary assistant who also was very intimate with her. They were, she dealt with all of her business stuff, and by then she was quite famous and traveled with her and so on. And Doris was with her for 30 years, and she would give her paintings, which at this point are worth $1 million a piece.
Sure.
And then later in life, she said, "Those were on loan. I want them back." And when she got a kind of a crush on a young man in his 20s who came out to fix her stove or something. And he became her companion for the last years of her life. And she tore up all of her wills. And the only will was, "I leave everything to Juan."
Wow.
And she had made, all these arrangements with museums and institutions. I mean, she had the kind of will that a famous painter would have. And at the end, it was kind of what she did with Maria after all these promises and all this free labor. Doris had the gumption, and again, she was 30 years, not just 9. She took her to court and fought for 6 years and got a fairly reasonable settlement, but it was a miserable experience because Georgia had been her world. There was this really deep love, she thought, and then suddenly, "You're out. I'm done with you."
Was this your first documentary play?
I have done adaptations of women's writing, especially lesbian women. I took the letters in the journal between Vita Sackville-West and Violet Trefusis and tried to make a coherent narrative out of that. I never did one where I had a narrator that was like necessary, like this, and then made it a character. When you did the journals and the entries, did you take a similar approach that you did with the letters, where it was just kind of a back and forth, or was there more of a traditional dialogue between the two characters where they're actually having a back and forth, not through long form, if you will, but actual traditional give and take dialogue? You just do the best that you can. I did make a point of never, ever changing anything in the dialogue. I would make ellipses and put ... So I've dropped a couple of paragraphs and picking it up. And in the case of this correspondence, I was also really careful. Everything is chronological.
Okay. So you didn't play with time. Okay, that's interesting as well.
Yeah.
What about how Do stage directions come into play in a piece like this?
Very minimally, because I knew the two actors are going to be doing the love letter thing.
Right. Yeah.
So
Okay.
there's a couple of those letters. Word on the street was that Maria had a very serious drinking problem, at least later in life. But there were some letters. She was very afraid of George's disapproval. She was, I think she was afraid to invoice her because she would just say, well, I don't want to pay for that, and she wanted to keep working for her. But you see this deference. And then there'll be a letter like on New Year's Eve. And I just want you to know I'm going to be so drunk I'm not worth shooting in the morning. And this has been a lousy year because Georgia had a lot of visitors that she was jealous of. And she's just like, and I hope next year is going to be better. And I don't want to see you at all. And I looked at that letter and it was just, FY. It was just like, what? And then I thought, oh, it's New Year's Eve. She started drinking around 4. And, it's just courage in a bottle. It's like,
Sure.
And I'm going to tell you what, you've been exploiting me for you, bitch.
Right.
And so I thought, you know what? Because it came out of nowhere. And then I'm like, oh, yeah, she's starting New Year's Eve early. And I thought, well, I'll put it in a stage direction or something that she's drinking when she's writing that.
Okay.
So there was a couple of moments where I felt like, I think we can make some guesses here as to what's going on. And there's a couple of times in the archive, she would write a letter that would be a little bit approaching criticism, and then there would be a note that it was never mailed. So I'd have her kind of crumple it up or something like that.
Right.
It's like, never mind. Again, afraid to upset Georgia.
So there's letters that were found that were never even mailed.
Yeah, this Maria Chabot saved everything.
Oh, interesting.
She saved little receipts from things that she'd bought. I mean, she was a pack rat, and so it's a very, very complete correspondence. There's a little bit of something missing that was water damaged, and some of it they took their best guess, and some of it was irretrievable, but it was only a short period. She had just stored it in cardboard boxes, and by the time people were coming to get it, mice had gotten in there and so on. So, yeah.
I want to take a turn towards your approach to musicals. It's been a little while since I've talked about musicals with playwrights. How do you start with your musicals? Do you start with the songs first? Do you do the composing as well, or the arrangement, or or is it a collaborative thing that you work with somebody and you kind of come up the music together?
For me, with Babe Didrikson, it started with my fascination with a masculine woman, with a woman who really defied all the gender expectations and was considered this great athlete. But what got me was she cheated against her own teammates in the 1932 Olympics. And that was the moment where it's like, I'm going to write about this.
Why a musical with something like that? Just to be non-traditional. Why a musical with this subject matter?
It's so rowdy. It's like Stomp. It's like,
okay.
We've got women's basketball. And then she did track and field. Then she did golf. And it just had a lot of, to me, and a lot of the whole first act starts in high school, where we see her being shaped by the bullying. But I felt what I did was I knew that my subject matter was somewhat untraditional. And like I say, my dance chorus looks like a rugby team instead of the Rockettes. And so what I did, it really explodes the canon for women in musical theater, because, it's just a very rigid trope. And I wanted a really traditional score. I wanted something really lush, seductive, memorable. You leave the theater. It's like I really wanted South Pacific, where I think almost every song made top 40 in its day. I mean, just was on the radio. I mean, that's never happened again. But
so, are you composing the music, or did you go and search out somebody?
I auditioned over 100 composers for 10 years.
Wow.
I got really fast at it because I was looking for melody. I knew exactly what I was looking for, and it was kind of the Rodgers and a really old-fashioned score. And people would send me.
Did you already have the music? And when I say music, I'm sorry. Did you already have the lyrics?
I had book, but I mean, I knew things are going to change when I bring in the musicians. So
Right.
but it wasn't terribly polished, but I had the whole book and I had all the numbers. I knew what they did. Like there's a high school dance number called Let the Boys Lead the Dance. And where she's being conditioned into, how to act around boys, let the boys lead the dance, let them be better
Right.
than you at whatever sport it is or whatever. And I wanted a waltz, so I knew that. And then I had some lyrics, but I said, if something comes to you, but because I auditioned over 100 composers in these national searches, I got really fast. I said, I want a chorus and I want a love ballad. And I said, you know what, you can play it on one finger on the piano. You can sing it a cappella into my voicemail on the phone if you want to. I know what I'm looking for, because people would send me something highly produced, with electronic whatever, but you're listening to it, it's like, well, damn. But it's like, where's the melody?
Right.
And there's no melody. I mean, it just had all this arrangement, and it was like, and I hear musicals. God, what did I just? Well, honestly, I felt like The Wiz was a little bit like that.
Mm.
Popular. That's the only thing I remember, and that's 3 notes from the entire musical. But I really wanted something like Some Enchanted Evening. I wanted a musical that the songs were so seductive that even if you were frightened or repulsed by a woman who looks like a man and who is more athletic than most men, it didn't matter. And I was using South Pacific because South Pacific was 49.
Right.
And that was before the real cutting edge of the civil rights movement. It was about interracial marriage, and it had biracial children born out of wedlock. And the producers in New York wouldn't bring it into New York. They were like, I don't think so. Open it in the West End and we'll see. And of course, it just tore up the tracks in the West End and brought it into New York. And then everything went top 40. And you have a country that was still really, really blatantly racist. And they're sitting there, Some Enchanted Evening. They loved it. And I thought, they're sitting there with all their racial prejudice, but in order to get their money's worth, in order to really marinate in these beautiful songs, they have to set that aside for 2 hours and just go into that. And I felt like that's what I want to do. I want to write something that's kind of a Rocky story about an athlete coming from behind and having to cheat against her own teammates and then kind of growing up and getting real about that, because she lost everything in the middle of her career and started over with golf. And I wanted that kind of redemption story.
Sure.
And it's a very American story, and it's a really old-fashioned score, but it's very radical about inclusion of lesbianism as well as transgender stuff and gender nonconformity. And I wanted to do what South Pacific did. And I think, honestly, South Pacific was the thin wedge of the civil rights movement, because everybody in America saw it, loved it, embraced it, sang it, bought the album. And the entire thing is about interracial marriage. And I don't think most people would say, oh, it's about South Pacific, it's about the war. It's like, no, it's really about tolerance. It's about, bigotry. And I wanted to do that with my show. So I know I'm not an idiot. I mean, I auditioned 100 composers for 10 years because I knew I have a very slim chance of having this make it. And if it's going to go, it's going to go because the score is amazing.
So did you start with the songs, or did you start with the...
I started with the book and then sketched out lyrics because I knew the numbers,
Got it. Okay.
Studded in there.
So how does that work when you're writing a musical? Do you know when it's time for a song?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And how does that work? When do you know it's time for a song? How does that dialogue work? Those exchanges then say, okay, and now here we go. I don't know how the craft of that works.
Well, the song serves a function. Like traditionally,
right.
You fall in love during the song, or it's a lot of mother-daughter struggle, which is a very archetypal. Like a lot of gay men have daddy issues because they're not manly enough for their dads. That's a trope we saw in Glee over and over. And so with mothers, it's like, oh, honey, if you just fix yourself up a little bit and curl your hair and stop Babe Diedrichson was a place kicker on the football team, and her mom was like, no, that's not going to get the job done. And so there's a song. She has a sister who's very gender conforming, and the mother's triangulating her against this butch daughter. And there's a three-way song that they sing, Mama, look at me, look at me. And she's saying, look at me. And she's an immigrant, and she's got an idea of what good mothering looks like. And so what it does is it articulates the tension in that drama. And then we have another song which really highlights the problem in sports. It's at the New York Reporters Club, where women aren't allowed. And so it's all male reporters. And one of the most famous ones, Paul Gallico, has decided there's only a very few sports that are appropriate for women. And they're horseback riding and ice skating and archery. They're graceful. You can maintain male pornographic fantasies about women skating as opposed to women's rugby. And it's called The 6 Beautiful Sports for Girls. And there's one dissenting reporter. That whole thing takes place. It's a huge chorus number that takes place in this men's club. And it involves kind of the male waiters who are kind of swanning around. It just kind of lays out the whole problem for women athletes in the 1940s in that one number, that 6 Beautiful Sports for Girls. You don't want to see women sweat. You don't want to see them grunt. So skating, horseback riding. It's a really fun number because it's the men are a little bit salacious and kind of pulls the mask off what they're really about.
Are there rules for songs that when a song comes up in a musical, are there certain things that is there a certain purpose that a song has to provide when it comes to a musical? Informational wise, is it?
Yeah. And actually in the love scene where she gets together with another woman golfer for the first time, it's I Always Knew. And Babe is singing a whole set of lyrics about I never knew. But the other girl is younger and much more comfortable with her lesbianism and grew up looking at posters of Babe Diedrichson. And so she's I Always Knew and Babe is I Never Knew. And so they sing against each other, and then they start to get on the same page together, and they resolve, with a kiss or whatever. But, that's the issue of just being kind of blindsided the first time somebody comes onto you that's same sex. It's like, oh, my God, I don't think I can do this. It's always, that's kind of a thing in gay and lesbian community. The first time you realize I'm really stepping over the line here. The numbers move the action forward.
Okay.
If they don't, you really shouldn't. You don't need it. You shouldn't have it in there.
Sure.
And sometimes they define character, and sometimes, they give you a break, or they're a comedic break. Like the 6 Beautiful Sports for Girls is a real send up of patriarchal prejudice against women athletes. It's fun. It's funny, but it's also kind of heavy.
Sure.
Yeah. A good song does a whole lot of different things. That's another reason I was so picky, because I needed a composer who could put character into it. Babe has a number, Watch Me Fly, which is after they just kept constraining her in her sport. And she was just like, let me just run with the ball. Let me just go. And the Watch Me Fly is a little bit like Peter Pan, I Got a Crow. It's
right.
Like, it's everybody else is kind of slamming you down. And you're like, I'm the great, you wait and see. Someday I'm going to, it's that. And so she did that musically. It's a real, it's a song that's full of a lot of bravado and frustration. And not everybody can translate emotions into melody like that. My composer, by the way, is Andrea Jill Higgins. And Jill is just brilliant. Her score is incomparable. And it's been frustrating because just trying to figure out who could sing this lead in New York, it has to be someone who's, a really looks like Ilana Mayer. Do you know who she is?
I don't.
She's a rugby player that's getting a lot of press right now. She just did Dancing with the Stars. Really large woman and really muscular and incredibly aggressive on the pitch. But not someone who's going to have a huge Broadway resume in musicals. Right. So that's been a real challenge. I think people look at the show and they're like, we don't have anybody who can do that. Where would that woman come up? She's not even going to make second string chorus, probably. The high heels and the bosom thing. But you know what? I might get in trouble because I was kind of supposed to be talking about Georgia and the Butch, I think.
No. This isn't about anything specific as far as any play goes. It's more about your approach to the craft of playwriting. It's your entire catalog, and that's why I wanted to touch base on musicals and what it's not certainly not about any particular piece that we do. We just really talk about how each playwright approaches, because everybody's got their own book, if you will, on playwriting, and that's what the purpose of this podcast is, to really kind of hopefully find something that somebody struggled to get over, that one obstacle that keeps them from completing a particular piece.
Well, I would just say that I think that there is almost nothing as potentially powerful as a musical, because they're so seductive. In high school, you can hardly get people to sign up for the drama club if you're out in the boonies. But the minute you put on a musical, the whole football team wants a piece of the action, and everybody comes, all the parents come. Right. It's powerful, and music is powerful. It's just like, I just keep coming back to South Pacific. They would not open it in New York. They felt it's just too scary, the interracial thing. And then it became this monster hit. And I really feel like it was just opened the door for the civil rights movement. It was kind of the opening shot across the bow. Like, I think we're ready to deal with this. I like to think that maybe because it just feels like theater's so irrelevant. You read the newspaper, especially this week, it's like, oh God, I write plays, and to just remember it's an incredibly powerful art form.
Did you start out as a playwright?
I started out a little bit as an actor.
Okay.
And the roles for women were so awful. I thought, I'm going to direct. Okay. And of course, it was all work by, for, and about men. And I'm like, you know what? This isn't doing it either. And then I decided I'm going to write my own work.
Did you study first, or did you just sit down, pen to paper, and go? I have 2 degrees
in theater. And then I worked in mainstream theater for about 5 years. And then it was like, I'm done. I want to go off and make theater with women, by women, about women. It was bitch, whore, Madonna, and some bimbo. Bitch, whore, Madonna, and bimbo. Everything that because I went to school in 1980 to 85 or something. That's all it was. And I just was like, this is ridiculous. And I tell people, I'm not that old. I'm 73. I guess that is old. But, I have 2 degrees in theater, and I read one woman playwright in those 6 years of theater. And that was Lillian Hellman, who wrote like men. Basically, children's hours, oh God, but so for me, it was like, you know what, I'm going to go away and do nothing but work with women, for 10 years and just try to decolonize my brain and try to stop using these tropes. It's not unique to women. I am sure that any colonized people of color, you come up through all these other people telling you who you are and who your people are. And it's all stereotypes and caricatures. And all of the roles for women felt like caricatures and stereotypes for me coming along. And I just didn't want to spend the one life that I had doing that.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay. So what Did you actually study playwriting? I know you have 2 theater degrees, but was playwriting one of those?
Yes. And I had my teacher was coming from Stanford, and she taught really old-fashioned playwriting, and
Well,
she
can
taught
you? Yeah, I want to unpack that. I want to hear what that entails.
I tell you, when people, talk to me about playwriting, I owe everything to this author named Bernard Gerbanier. And I think he wrote a play that was called Playmaking or Playwriting, something like that. But it's Bernard Gerbanier. And he was somebody who had a structure. And if you have a play that's going to be 2 hours long and has 15 characters and it has 3 or 4 subplots, he showed you how to plot that out, like that people are sitting in a seat for 2 hours. And he said that a certain thing has to happen in a full-length play in the opening 10 minutes. If it's a one act, it has to happen in the first 3 minutes. And he really kind of used a sports analogy, like people need to know the game. You can't be shooting hoops and halfway through the hockey sticks come out. They're like, what? You kind of introduce your teams and a little bit how this points is, we're going to watch Hamlet avenge his father's death. And he's got this creepy situation with his mother's new husband or whatever. You're like, okay, I'm all set. I'm Team Hamlet. Let's go, But you can't switch it up halfway through,
Right.
And then certain other things have to happen at about the 45, 50-minute thing, which is in traditional theater, the act break. And then there's what is it in baseball? This 11th, 9th, 7th
inning stretch. Yeah.
7, yeah, where you do something completely different, something utterly different has to come in, and it is either another person, if the tension's between 2 people, it has to be a third party, or an object. And then you have to resolve. Nothing goes into overtime in theater. You really have to resolve the question that you asked in the beginning must be resolved in the last 3 minutes. If you do it before the last 3 minutes, they don't know why they're still in the theater. If you don't do it at all, they leave very unsatisfied, and you kind of fudged on your job. The Gerbanier structure, every time I have a play that's not working, I can sit down and plug in the points in my play in the Gerbanier structure, and it will show me exactly. It's like using a computer on your car. It's like, there it is, that you're missing the 7-inning stretch in that particular dyad of conflict. There's no 7-inning stretch, so the resolution is fake. It's like if you and I are having an argument, I'm like, yes, you are. No, I'm not. Yes, you are. And then I'm like, okay, I am. It's very unsatisfying. But if we're doing that and we're going at it, and, yes, you are. No, I'm not. No, I'm not. The phone rings. I pick it up. I have a short conversation. I hang up and I look at you and I'm like, yes, I am. That satisfies an audience because that's the 7-inning stretch. So anyway, I owe everything to Gerbanier, because left to my own devices, I have a lot of the tools, but I think that my structure wouldn't satisfy like a terrific sports event, when someone comes behind and then they're tied forever and then another one pulls ahead. You need suspense, momentum. You need, it's a spectator sport, and you need to structure it like an edge of your seat. Huge investment in my team. I'm a Red Sox fan all the way. Like, I really care. If you don't get them bought into that level where they're, waving the noisemakers and all that, that's part of why your play doesn't work. And then the suspense, the momentum. Nobody wants to see a hopelessly lost game that goes on for 2 hours. Like in the opening half hour, some team is so far ahead, it's sort of like, we can leave now.
Yeah. Is that the old-fashioned playwriting you were talking about that professor taught? Then
She taught using Bernard Gerbanier's book and his structure. He called it the proposition. That was what his title for laying out this grid was.
Interesting.
But it really enabled me. I did a play within a play that had 9 characters, and in the play within the play, it sort of mirrored who they were not doing the play within the play.
Right.
And so it was actually kind of like playing triple layer chess. And I was able to do it because of the Gerbanier book, because I could lay out a grid. It was doing 2 different roles for 9 different characters, each of which has to satisfy all these plot points.
Right.
I could never have done that, but I used his grid, and I was able to plug in all those points and think of them and get them in the script. And the whole thing came apart and then came back together, and everything resolved. And I just, I completely owe that to Mr. Gerbanier. I could never have done that. And I mean, if you satisfy an audience, it might be a shit play because your themes are so minor, like
Right.
they're not significant, or you can't write dialogue for crap, but you will have a structure that satisfies. And no matter how good your dialogue is or how meaningful and important your social justice issues are, if you don't satisfy the audience structurally, if it's like it's like me playing tennis with Martina, if it's that, it won't matter what you're trying to do. It won't be any good. So to me, everything's about structure. That's the most important thing. You have to have the other things, but if you don't have the structure, it's just not going to fly. I'm passionate about that.
And what about you mentioned dialogue a second ago? What makes good dialogue? Or what makes crappy dialogue?
I think complexity makes good dialogue. Like,
what does that look like on the page?
Well, if you and I are talking in this interview and I'm like, I just feel like we're having trouble because you never really got over the fact I divorced you. And the people listening to the podcast are like, well, that's new. You know what I mean? Like,
sure.
I feel like, people, when they pull out something, it's like a game. You're resting your cards, and then suddenly you lay them down. And you're like, oh my God, that was a great poker face. I think surprise is always good. You think I didn't hear anything you said, and suddenly it's like, gin. I mean, it's
right.
Like, I feel like that element of surprise. Mostly, I think they just have to live, and because I start with structure and everything, I'll have an idea of the character that I'm trying to write, and I'll put words in their mouth for a while, and I can tell that's just pathetic. And then there just comes a day, you just stay with it. You stay with it. And there's a day that comes when they just elbow you out of the way. And they're like, no, I wouldn't say that. Shut up. Listen to me. And they start dictating the dialogue to you. But you have to earn that. You write a lot of shit dialogue. I feel like I'm calling them in, and they're like, and then finally like, oh God, I can't watch this anymore. All right, here, I'm going to dictate the dialogue to you. And they start to live, and you're just recording them. And you can hear them and they're like, oh, and I'm like, well, I need you guys to kiss at the end of this scene. She's like, not going to. He hasn't earned it, blah, blah. And you're like, okay. You want another scene? Or, it's just such an amazing thing when the characters come to life and they start collaborating with you and they begin to just tell you, nope, wouldn't say that.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great, but you earn it. What was it Thomas Edison said? I'm not that much smarter than other people. I just stay with problems longer. Or Einstein or Edison said it, but that's the truth. I think the difference between somebody brilliant and not is honestly more to do with you stay with the problem longer. And you have to know when it's bad. You can't be like, all right, end scene, done. It's like, no, it nags at you. It's like, she wouldn't say that. That's just something, I don't know what it is, but there's something about that not working. And you never go, it's good enough. You're like, I know it's there. Just I'll get it. But this isn't it yet, but it's coming. I think having the faith, if I stay with it long enough, I'll get it.
Are you editing as you write, or
yeah,
when you're realizing like that doesn't work, that's not gonna, I need something different, or do you just write it all out and then go back and fix it?
I recently wrote a play for my island. I live on Mount Desert Island in Maine. And really, really rich people, and really we have a history of people who came with 12 servants, and the Rockefellers, and all of that. And so it was a play concerning 2 ladies' maids on the island, and I wanted to write about a famous person, but I was going to do it through her maids. And I had written this kind of spicy maid trope, like Moliere's smart-ass maids and that kind of thing. And meanwhile, I'm trying to get information on this woman's maid, Clementine. and I couldn't find the people who had met her. They'd all died. And I just gave up. And so I started writing. And then somebody found a photograph of her. And I guess the best way I could describe her is she looked like a manatee, just kind of placid, and you just felt comfortable. Your blood pressure lowered when you saw the picture of what Clement. And I realized, no, so the second character became the spicy maid. And I wrote a really simple, deeply Catholic woman from France, born in 1870s, and her world's being, turned upside down by the economic changes, much like Downton Abbey after the First World War. Anyway, but I threw the whole thing out. I just looked at her, I was like, oh, all right, a manatee, okay. And in many ways, it was more dramatic because that's a kind of woman who never gets upset. She's very placid. And then suddenly the rug gets pulled out from under her because of changes in her mistress's finances and so on. And so watching someone like me have a panic attack is kind of a regular occurrence. But the manatee, picture, what would a manatee having a panic attack look like?
Right.
And so I put that on the stage, and it turns out it was far more interesting because that's a woman that never gets upset because her world is so ordered.
Right, sure.
The Pope, the priest, and me, and then there's Mrs. Farrand, my boss, and then there's the linen maid, and everything is so, and then all of that is in chaos because, World War II and financial changes, and there's been a huge fire that burned up most of the mansions on the island, and she has no context, she has no tools for dealing with that, and so it was really, but it came from that picture, and it's like you said, I was very invested in this maid, and it was like, sure. All of that goes now, all of it.
Right.
And it turned out so much more interesting.
I want to go back to Gerbanier real quick, and the structure that he taught you from that book. So when you figure out when you get your idea for whatever piece you're going to work on next, do you plug each one of those? Do you look at his structure and say, I'm going to write just this one line that happens now, this one line that happens here, I know it, and then sit down to write it out? So do you I guess it's an outline.
Yeah, I'm currently working on a play about Comstock, who's the original censorship of abortion, contraception. We still have Comstock laws on the book. So it's, anyway, he's a jackass, and he's a postal inspector, and he's anti-vice squad. He's horrible. And he has a man working for him named Tom, who's the protagonist of the play, who's beginning to realize this man is just attacking women. He's not coming after the real perpetrators at all. He's just locking women up, prostituted women who've had abortions, etc. Anyway, this is his major stuff is with the woman he's falling in love with, but they have a little bit of a daddy thing going on. Comstock's his boss, and he's apprenticing under him, and then he breaks with him, it's not working because there's no 7-inning stretch. It's like, I'm going to work for you. I admire you. I like you. Oh, I don't. I'm going to leave. And the audience is like, well, what happened? And in that scene, I solved it with a cigar. Like, Comstock is gloating over having locked up this woman, and he's going on and on. He's not realizing Tom is starting to pull away from him a little bit. Like, I think you got a little sexual fetish thing going on here. And Comstock has a cigar, and he cuts the tip off it. And then he offers Tom one. And it's very phallic, and you roll it, you smell it, you cut the tip off it, and he hands it to him. And Tom is kind of holding this symbol of patriarchal power, a very, very expensive cigar, while he's arguing with Comstock. And then at the end, he tells him he's going to quit working for him, but he gets to take the cigar and just put it on the desk and walk out. Like, his interactions with the object. Do I light it? It's a little bit of initiation into the phallic male club, and we see him interacting. We see his, ambiguous relationship to the cigar. And then Comstock says something that's just a bridge too far. And For some reason, I don't know why, it's the magic of Gerbanier.
Right.
But it's like a third character. The cigar, the interaction with the cigar made the scene work.
But if you outlined it prior, wouldn't you know that
I didn't have a cigar in it. I knew that it was going to be a scene where they kind of had a breakup.
Okay, so you had it. You knew that you had a 7-inning stretch, but the original one that you had wasn't working, and said, "I need to find."
I didn't have one at all because it was it's a subplot. His business.
Got it.
Stock was kind of a little daddy side issue, but I realized I need to take it as seriously. It's a conflict that we take it to tension, then it gets resolved. I need to go ahead and take it as seriously as my main plot lines. But it was such a simple fix. It was just like he's handing the sort of sacred cigar of manhood to him, and Tom is like, "Yeah, no, never mind." And that it comes with privilege because it's such an expensive item. It's kind of like, yeah, I can do without this. Yeah.
Well, the funny thing is, you just you kind of beat me to the punch. Usually, when I'm wrapping up interviews, I say, "What are you working on now?" And you just told me, so that's good.
I actually think I'm going to get a reading of Restel up in New York today. There was a woman who said she's going to read it at the Dramatist Guild. I'm crossing fingers.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the other two questions I have that I always wrap things up with: where can people find your work?
Carolyn, www.carolyngage, one word, .com. And
Great.
if you name that you heard the Players Spotlight podcast, I will send you for free any play. My catalog's online. I'll send you anything you want as a PDF.
Oh, wonderful. All right. I'll make sure that I include that in the show notes.
Go to the Tank. Go to the Tank.
Yep.
I don't have their dates, February and March, but go to the Tank and get your ticket for Georgia and the Butch, because
I will have that. I will have that I will have that link in the show notes as well. And then finally, are you on the socials?
I'm on Facebook and Blue Sky. Just put in Carolyn Gage and it should get you there.
Wonderful. All right. Well, Carolyn Gage, thanks for coming on to this episode of Playwright Spotlight.
Thank you, James. You asked great. It was really deep playwriting stuff. I loved it. Thank you.
I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you for tuning into this episode of Playwright Spotlight. Again, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment down below, and share this show with your friends. If you're listening to us on your favorite podcast platform, be sure to leave a 5-star review and subscribe to the channel. And in the meantime, and until we see each other again, keep writing.